Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to all of you. This is Research Writing and Communication class, and today's title is The Art of Writing Well, Perspectives from Indian Knowledge Systems. It's nice to see all of you. And today we have Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, who will be facilitating this session. A few words about Dr. Shankar before we begin. Dr. Shankar Rajaraman is a psychiatrist by training and a Sanskrit poet by passion. His interests include Sanskrit literature, Indian aesthetics, and Indian psychology. Shankar Rajaraman is a postdoctoral fellow with the NIAS Consciousness Studies program at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. He holds an MBBS degree from Bangalore University and a postgraduate diploma in psychiatry from the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences. He also has an MA in Sanskrit with a gold medal and an MSc in psychology, both from the Karnataka State Open University, Mysore. He secured his PhD in psychology from the University of Mysore on the topic, A Qualitative Approach to the Psychology of Three Self-Conscious Emotions from Sanskrit Poetics. He is a recipient of the prestigious Bhadra and Vyas Samman from the President of India for his contribution to Sanskrit language and literature. He has also been conferred with the Professor M. Hiriyana Sanskrit Works Award for the Best Sanskrit Poet of the Year 2013 and the Bananji Award for his contribution to Sanskrit. He has several publications to his credit, including the English translations of two Ayurvedic texts on dietetics, a Sanskrit messenger poem, and a Sanskrit epic, a Kannada translation of two chapters from the encyclopedic work Manasullasa, and a Sanskrit translation of the Kannada Vajanas composed by Basaveshwara. Several of his original poetic writings in Sanskrit have also been published. Presently, he is translating Shrikanta Charita, a 12th century Sanskrit epic by the Kashmirian poet Manka. So that is a small, brief introduction about Shankar sir. He is much more than that, as we all know him personally. So a very warm welcome to you, Shankar sir, and we are waiting very impatiently for your class. Over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Meera, for that introduction. Hope everybody is keeping well during these difficult times. As you know, my talk is titled The Art of Writing Well, Perspectives from Indian Knowledge Systems. Initially, I had just poetics in my mind, but later I found out that there is a lot of information on the art of writing well, not just in poetics, but also in the Shastras. And so I included the general term Indian knowledge systems later. I would request Meera or others to just share my slides.
Yeah, the screen is being shared.
Yeah. Thank you, Meera. So if you can go to the next slide. So before actually getting into the topic per se, let us see what Shastra and Kavya mean. There is this famous verse, Dve Vartmani Giram Devyaha Shastram cha Kavi Karmacha Pragnopagnyam Tayoradhyam Pratibodbhavam Antimam. So literature is classified into scientific literature, that is Shastra, and creative literature, that is Kavya. So Dve Vartmani Giram Devyaha, the goddess of speech, the stream of speech is divided into two parts, Shastra and Kavi Karma, Shastra and Kavya. The first is a product of Prajna and the second is a product of Pratibha. So you have the Shastra literature and the Kavya literature, but we also have something called as the Vyakhyanas or the commentaries, and these commentaries are written both on Shastra works as well as on Kavya works. But what is actually Prajna and Pratibha? Let us go to the next slide to understand what Prajna and Pratibha are. This is again a quite famous shloka by Bhattatauta, the teacher of Abhinav Gupta, whom some of you might have heard about. So this shloka, it lists certain cognitive faculties, Smriti, Mati, Buddhi, Prajna and Pratibha. So Smritir Vyatita Vishaya, Matir Agami Gochara, Buddhis Tatkaliki Jnaya, Prajna Traikaliki Mata, Prajna Navanavonmesha Shalini Pratibha. So what is Smriti? Smriti is memory. It is Vyatita Vishaya. It has for its subject something that has happened in the past. Mati Ragami Gochara. So Mati, pertains to, it is foresight and it pertains to something in the future. Buddhis tatkaliki jnaya. Buddhi is something that works at the present moment, tatkaliki. And prajna traikaliki mata. But prajna or wisdom is something that pertains to the past, the present, as well as the future. So the Shastrakaras, those who write Shastras, must basically possess this prajna. They have to see things from a broader perspective beyond the confines of time and place. But then, what is pratibha? Pratibha is a special type of prajna. So prajna navanavonmesha shalini pratibha. So prajna that is able to have newer and newer flashes. Navanava unmesha shalini is called as pratibha. So there is something called as novelty in pratibha, and pratibha is what a kavi has. So you can see how pratibha and prajna are actually related. So Shastra and Kavya are not two widely diverging disciplines, but they are quite related. And both Shastrakara as well as the Kavi require prajna. Only that the Kavi requires a special type of prajna that is called as pratibha. And what is new about pratibha? What is so novel about pratibha is not that poetry actually, it's not that poetry it's not a novel product. It is not that poetry acquaints us with something which is unknown. But what poetry does is to remind us about what has been forgotten. And because it reminds us, we feel that we have gained some, we feel that there is novelty in the product that has been reminded, because we have forgotten it. So coming to the next slide. So the presentation will basically be first concentrating on the Shastras, then on the Kavyas, and how do you write a Shastra, and what should you keep in mind when you write a Kavya. So writing a Shastra, here we look at something called as Tantra Yuktis. Many of you might have not heard of this, but those from an Ayurvedic background surely have heard about the Tantra Yuktis. So what are these Tantra Yuktis? These are defined as, so Tantra Yuktis are basically certain tools that are necessary not only to understand the structure of a text, but also as a guide to write a Shastra text. And these have been basically mentioned in the Ayurvedic text, Charaka Samhita and the Sushruta Samhita. We also have the mention of Tantra Yuktis in the Artha Shastra of Kautilya. Charaka Samhita mentions 36 Tantra Yuktis, while Sushruta Samhita has 32. Few other Ayurvedic writers have mentioned other Tantra Yuktis also, but there are also counter arguments that the other Tantra Yuktis can be subsumed within the Tantra Yuktis that have been mentioned by Charaka and Sushruta themselves. So these are Tantra Samanvayartham Yojana. These are necessary to know the unity of a text. Samanvaya is unity. Tantra is a text. Tantra Samanvaya, the unity of a text. And Yojana are tools, the tools that are necessary to understand the unity of a text. And as I just mentioned, these are tools that are necessary not only to understand the internal coherence of a text, but also if you were to write a text, you need to be conversant with these Tantra Yuktis. So some modern writers like Avhad et al. Have linked these Tantra Yuktis with various terms used in research methodology. I will not be dealing with all the Tantra Yuktis, but only a few examples, because there are 36 Tantra Yuktis and dealing them within the short time of 1.5 hours is very difficult. So I'll just be giving few examples of these Tantra Yuktis. And you could relate in your minds to these Tantra Yuktis with terms that are used in research methodology. So for example, you have the Adhikarana. Adhikarana is defined as Yam Artham Adhikritya Uchyate, the subject matter which is under discussion. And when I say the subject matter, Artha or Adhikarana, it is you have to, it is not just about, you should look at it from a broad perspective as well as from a narrow perspective. So it could be the thesis as a whole, it could be a chapter of a thesis, or it could be a section, or it could be a subsection. All of these can be called as Adhikarana. Then you have what is called as Prayojana. Prayojana is Yad Artham Kamayamana Pravritti, the objective of a thesis or of a writing. The end result for which an activity is undertaken. and it can be very broad and as broad as eternal freedom from sorrow. So eternal freedom from sorrow is a very broad objective. And if you were to look at the text of Sankhya philosophy, the broad objective would be actually eternal freedom from sorrow. But you could also look at prayojana as a narrow objective. A narrow objective such as the purpose of a particular section, which could be like establishing something as a logical necessity before moving to the next section. That also is the prayojana. So you can look at prayojana from a broad perspective or from a narrow perspective. So just as we looked at adhikarana from a broad perspective of thesis as well as from the narrow perspective of a subsection. Let us go to the next slide. So you have Purva Paksha. Purva Paksha is, it's defined as Akshepa Purvakaha Prashna. What is Akshepa Purvakaha Prashna? A question that is raised as an objection. To give an example from an Ayurvedic text, they say that the self is inactive. So how can the inactive self end up performing actions and being found in samsara? So self is defined as something which is nishkriya, that is inactive. But the same self gets embroiled in samsara. How can the inactive self perform actions and be embroiled in samsara? So this is an example for a Purva Paksha, because there is an objection here. The next Tantra Yukti that I am quoting is Ekanta. Ekanta is defined as Sarvatra Yat Avadharanena Uchyate. So presenting facts about something for which counter examples don't exist within a category to which that something belongs. To give an example, Madanaphala is an emetic. So Madanaphala is a particular herb, and this Madanaphala is an emetic. Every Madanaphala that you study is an emetic, and therefore there are no counter examples within the category of Madanaphala. There is no one Madanaphala which is non-emetic. All Madanaphalas, every example of a Madanaphala is an emetic. The commentator Chakrapani here gives an example of a sentence which appears like Ekanta but which is not Ekanta. The example that he quotes is Arjuna is the greatest archer. So Arjuna is the greatest archer is not, he says that this is not Ekanta. Madanaphala is an emetic, is an Ekanta, but Arjuna is a greatest archer is not Ekanta, because there is no category of Arjunas among which one Arjuna is a greatest archer. So you can see what is the difference between the first and the second example. There is a category of Madanaphala herbs, and every Madanaphala is an emetic, but there is no such a category of Arjunas, among which there is one Arjuna who is the greatest archer. Then you have Naikanta. Naikanta is defined as Kvachit Tatha, Kvachit Anyatha. So presenting multiple viewpoints by kindred scholars. So this is important. You shouldn't have scholars from some other discipline. It should be scholars from the same discipline. So when scholars from the same discipline present multiple viewpoints about a specific topic, that is called as Naikanta. So for example, there are some who favor direct perception and therefore reject the possibility of reincarnation. These are certain scholars belonging to the group of Ayurveda scholars. So these are kindred scholars. So there is one group of Ayurveda scholars who favor direct perception and reject the possibility of reincarnation, because reincarnation cannot be known through direct perception. And there is another group of Ayurvedic scholars who, because of their belief in the Vedas, accept reincarnation. So this is an example for Naikanta, where two different viewpoints have been presented. Coming to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So Apavarga. Apavarga is another Tantra Yukti, which is defined as Abhivyapya Apakarshanam, that is stating an exception. In all patients of poisoning, sudation, that is Vedana therapy, where you make the patient sweat, sudation is contraindicated. And then you say you present an exception, except in those with insect bites. Coming to the next Tantra Yukti, Nirnaya. Nirnaya is the answer to the Purva Paksha. So you had the Purva Paksha as asking in the previous slide, they say that the self is inactive. How can the inactive self end up performing actions? So the answer to this is Nirnaya. The answer is the mind is unconscious and active. The conscious but inactive self is regarded as performing actions. It is regarded as performing actions. It doesn't perform actions, but is regarded as performing actions because of its contact with the mind. The mind is active, and the inactive self, because of its contact with the mind, is regarded as performing actions. And that is how the inactive self, because of its contact with the mind, becomes embroiled in samsara, though per se the self is inactive. So the next tantra yukti is uddesha. Uddesha is samasa kathana, that is abridgment or synopsis. And I take an example not from the Ayurvedic Shastra, but from Natya Shastra. So you have a synopsis of the topics that are discussed in Natya Shastra. This synopsis is presented by Bharata in the 6th chapter. He says, Rasa, Bhava, Abhinaya, Dharmi, Vritti, Pravritti, Siddhi, Swara, and Atodya, Gana, and Ranga. This is the Sangraha of Natya Shastra. So this is the synopsis of Natya Shastra. These are the main topics that are dealt with in Natya Shastra. And when we present such a synopsis, that is called as Uddesha. But you have a counter to that in the form of Nirdesha, which is Sankshepena Uttasya Vivaranam, which is an elaboration of what has been abridged. So all of these, that is Rasa, Bhava, Abhinaya, which have been told in as a synopsis in one chapter, have been dealt in detail in the subsequent chapters. So each of the above, that is Rasa, Bhava, Abhinaya, Dharmi, etc., is taken up for elaboration in the subsequent chapters. So this is an example for Nirdesha. Then you have Vidhana. What is Vidhana? Vidhana is Prakarana Anupurvya Abhidhanam. That is logical sequencing when you list few subjects. So, for example, of sections and of the subjects that are discussed therein. So an example would be Rasa, Rudhira, Mamsa, Medas, Asti, Majja, Shukranam Utpadaha, Kramanurodena Abhidanam. So when you give a list of the 7 dhatus, the 7 dhatus are Rasa, Rudhira, Rasa, Rakta, Mamsa, Medas, Asti, Majja, and Shukra. So these are the 7 tissues, 7 dhatus. But when you list them, you list them in a particular logical sequence. You first have Rasa, then have Rudhira, then have Mamsa. So what is logical about this is that what comes subsequent is a product of the product of what comes before. So Rudhira, from an Ayurvedic point of view, is born from Rasa. Mamsa is born from Rudhira. Medas is born from Mamsa. Asti is born from Medas. So there is a logical sequence of when you list. So you don't list in a haphazard way, but even when you are listing, you list them in a particular sequence. So these are some of the, and there are also few more that I will discuss. Can we go to the next slide? So 5 more examples of Tantra Yuktis. As I said, I will not be discussing all the 36 Tantra Yuktis. Atita Veksha. Atita Veksha is Purva Uktasya Avekshanam. That is reiteration or referring back to what was said earlier. For example, there is one chapter called as Chikitsa Sthana in Charaka Samhita. There is also another chapter called as Nidana Sthana. So Nidana Sthana comes first and it talks about the pathology of diseases. In Chikitsa Sthana, you have the treatment of diseases. So in Chikitsa Sthana, in a chapter on Jwara, the author says, Nidane Purva Muddishta Ya Pratakchat Jwarakrati. So he begins by saying, in the Nidana Sthana, in an earlier chapter, the pathology of Jwara was discussed. Here, we discuss the treatment of Jwara. So this is called as reiteration or referring back to what was said earlier. A counter to this is Anagata Avekshana, which is alluding to something that is discussed in detail later in the text. So you have in one chapter the Shad Virechana Shatani, the 600 purgatives that have been just mentioned, but these have been described in Vistara, that is in detail, in a later chapter called as Kalpasthana. So this Anagata Avekshana is therefore a counter to Atita Aveksha. Then you have Swasanya. Swasanya is Yana Shastrantara Samanya Sanya. That is technical terms which are very particular to a particular the branch. For example, a term that is very particularly used in case of Ayurveda. When you say the word Mithuna, for example, in Ayurveda, it means a combination of Krita and Sarpi. So this is called as Swasanya, technical terms that are very particular to a branch. And we all know that when we write a research article or when we write our thesis, we keep using these technical terms, which are very specific to that particular branch. Then you have what is called as Nidarshana. Nidarshana is the use of analogy in order to illustrate a point. And again, I take up an example from the Kavya Shastra. So in Kavya Shastra, you have two types of mental states that are discussed. One group of mental states is called as the Sthayi Bhava, and another group of mental states are called as the Vyabhichari Bhava. Sthayi Bhava are stable mental states, while these Vyabhichari Bhavas are mental states that are temporary. They come and go, but they come and go within the ambit of the Sthayi Bhavas. So the Vyabhichari Bhavas are 36 mental states that come and go, that appear and disappear within the broader framework of the Sthayi Bhavas, which are primary mental states. You could call them as primary mental states, which are stable mental states, which last for a longer period of time. So when you describe these Sthayi Bhavas and Vyabhichari Bhavas, a particular analogy is given. Unmajjanto nimajjanta sthayin amritavaridau urmivat vardhayantenam yanti tadrupatam chate. So the Sthayi Bhava is compared to an ocean, and the Vyabhichari Bhavas that arise within the ambit of the Sthayi Bhavas are compared to the waves arising from the ocean. Just as the waves arise from the ocean and disappear in it, in the same way the Vyabhichari Bhavas arise and disappear within the Sthayi Bhava. So this makes the point that is being discussed very clear. So next you have Vyakhyana. Vyakhyana is Tantre Atishaya Upavaranam. So it is providing additional discussion or additional information or additional discussion on a topic that is over and above what is discussed in other texts of the same discipline. So you provide some extra discussion, some extra points on a particular topic, which is over and above what is discussed in other texts of the same discipline. So some of these Tantra Yuktis might be more clear to you when I take an example. So the next slide has an example. Yeah, sorry. This is the intervening slide, which is I had discussed about the Tantra Yuktis. Now you have what are called as the Tantra Doshas. Unfortunately, there are 40 Tantra Doshas which are actually mentioned by Chakrapani, and these Tantra Doshas are supposed to have been discussed by Charaka Samhita, by Charaka in his Charaka Samhita in the Uttara Tantra portion of Charaka Samhita. Unfortunately, the Uttara Tantra portion, which discusses the 40 Tantra Doshas, faults, is not available. This Uttara Tantra portion is not available, but we could still garner some examples from Charaka Samhita itself. One of the previous chapters of Charaka Samhita, the Vimanasthana, which has a subsection called as Roga Pishak Jitiya. And here, some of these faults are mentioned under the category of Vakyartha Dosha. Example is, for example, you have Nunam. Nunam is where what is multi-causal is described as arising from a single cause. So something has multiple causes, but you describe it as arising from a single cause. That is called as Nuna. Adhikam is where you repeat the same idea by using synonyms. So it is it is something it doesn't add to knowledge, and therefore it becomes superfluous, and therefore it is called as adhika. Anarthakam. Anarthaka is incoherence, where you have a meaningless jumble of letters. Aparthakam or irrelevance, where you have meaningful words, but they are meaninglessly just juxtaposed. So you have a meaningful words coming together, but the whole group of words doesn't make any sense. Then you have Viruddha, which is incongruity, and which can be of several types. Two examples, two types would be Drishtanta Viruddha and Sarvatantra Viruddha. So Drishtanta Viruddha is where there is an incongruity of example. So for example, if you say fire is hot and you say fire is hot like water, this is an example of Drishtanta Viruddha. And Sarvatantra Viruddha is where something is incongruous with the entire discipline itself. When you say diseases are causeless, it is incongruous with the entire discipline of Ayurveda itself, because nowhere in Ayurveda is it said that there is no cause for diseases. Disease always have a cause. So these are some of the examples of tantra doshas. So let us go to the next slide. There are two beautiful verses in Charaka Samhita after the discussion on the Tantra Yuktis. Charaka actually just mentions the Tantra Yuktis. It is Chakrapani, who is the commentator on Charaka Samhita, who gives a detailed description of what each of these Tantra Yuktis are. But these two verses that I have just quoted these two verses are from Charaka Samhita. So Charaka says that if you study a particular branch of knowledge using the Tantra Yuktis, it is possible to understand another branch of knowledge also very easy. But if you study a particular branch of knowledge without using Tantra Yuktis, even the purport of that particular branch of knowledge will not be clear to you. So, ekasmin api yasyeha labdha shastre sadamati sa shastram anyadapyashu yuktim nyatva prabudyate adhiyanopi shastrani tantrayukta vichakshana nadi gacchati shastrarthan arthan bhagyakshaye yata. One who has understood a single branch of knowledge thoroughly by applying these tantra yuktis, the 36 tantra yuktis, can easily understand even another branch of knowledge. But if one does not apply the tantra yuktis and attempts to master various branches of knowledge, one will never be able to get the purport of those branches of knowledge, just as a person who is ill-fated can never attain his desires. So the tantra yuktis, as you see, are very important to understand a text on and also to write a text. So coming to the next slide. So this is an example, and I have the translation in the next slide, but let me read out. This is from a text on poetics, Kavya Mimamsa by Rajashekara. And this is a discussion there on something called as Paka. So Satatam Abhyasa Vashatah Sukave Vakyam Pakam Ayati Kapunarayam Pakaha Ityacharya Parinamaha Iti Mangala Kapunarayam Parinamaha Ityacharya Supam Tingam Cha Shrava Priya Vyutpatihi Iti Mangala Saushabhyametat Padanivesha Nishkampata Pakaha Ityacharya. And the discussion goes on in this manner. So let us look at the translation in the next slide. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Let us go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is the discussion. This is the translation of the discussion which you saw in the previous slide from Rajashekara's Kavya Mimamsa. So here something called as Paka is being discussed. So the discussion begins with this particular remark by Rajashekara. Because of continuous practice, a good poet's words attain Paka. Now, what is this Paka you are talking about? Ask the masters. So Rajashekara repeatedly quotes some scholars as masters. We don't know who these masters are, but apparently Rajashekara and others of his time knew who these masters were. So these masters are asking, what is this Paka that you are talking about? So there is one Mangala whom Rajashekara quotes, and Mangala says, it is ripeness or completeness or perfection, parinama. So now again the masters pose a counter question. Now what is this other ripeness that you have just mentioned? What is this parinama that you have just mentioned? Ask the masters. And Mangala answers, because the question has been posed to Mangala. Ripeness is the ability to use nouns and verbs that are pleasant to the ear, answers Mangala. But then the masters do not agree with this. They criticize this particular definition of what is Paka, and they provide their own definition of what Paka is. And they say, no, but when you say noun, this is the use of nouns and verbs that are pleasant to the ear. Isn't it nothing but agreeability of sound? Isn't it Saushabhya? And therefore, we define what Paka is. What is Paka? Paka occurs when one is completely sure about the words that are inserted in a poem, Opa in the masters. And they quote a particular verse in support of what they have said. It is therefore said, as long as the mind is unsettled, the poet keeps on adding and removing verses from his words from his poem. But at some blessed moment, the words attain stability, and lo and behold, the poet's muse has attained perfection. So this is what is perfection. And according to us, perfection occurs when one is completely sure about the words one has inserted in his or her poem. But then the supporters of another poetician, Vamana, don't agree with this. They say, but it is possible that one has forced oneself to believe that the words have attained stability. So I can force myself to believe that the words that I have put in my poem have attained stability. So they give a different definition. Therefore, the state when words attain irreplaceability is actually Paka, say the supporters of Vamana. Then Rajshekara quotes his wife Avanti Sundari, who has a different opinion on what Paka actually is. She says it's not the irreplaceability of words, it is something else. And Rajshekara quotes his wife Avanti Sundari on this particular discussion. But what you have just defined as Paka, that is irreplaceability of words, is actually Paka. This is not Paka, this is actually incompetence, says Avanti Sundari. Why does she say so? This is so because we see that there are several different versions of the same poem, all of them perfect in the case of great poets. So how can you say that the same poet has replaced his own words and penned several versions of his own poem? And therefore, it is not possible that Paka is actually the irreplaceability of words, because the same poet has replaced his own words and created several versions of his own verse, all of them abounding in Paka. All of them completely perfect. So this the definition which is provided by the supporters of Vamana for Paka is wrong, says Avanti Sundari. So what is Paka? Therefore, Paka is based on the use of carefully chosen words that are proper for the sentiment that the poet wishes to delineate. And in support of this, Rajshekara quotes a particular verse. Even when there is an orator, there are words and meanings, and there is sentiment too. There is still something else. And this something else is Paka. That is important, without which speech doesn't drip with the nectar of joy. And therefore, this something which needs to be there, without which speech doesn't drip with the nectar of joy, is actually Paka. And it is as defined by Avanti Sundari, as defined by Rajshekara himself, it is the use of words which are proper for the sentiment. So in the previous discussion, if you go through, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, if you go through the previous discussion, you can see some of the tantriktis which we discussed. Adhikarana, Prayojana, Naikanta, Hetu. Hetu is something which I didn't discuss. Uddesha, Purva Paksha, and Nirnaya. There, the Adhikarana is basically the topic that is being discussed, which is Paka. And Prayojana, these are not given, the author doesn't directly say that this is the Prayojana or this is the Adhikarana. When we read the text, we need to make out which is the Adhikarana and which is the Prayojana, etc. So the Prayojana basically is not directly mentioned by the poet, but when he says, without which speech doesn't drip with the nectar of joy. So it is understood that the Prayojana is the attainment of aesthetic joy. So like this, if you go through this particular discussion, you can see several of these Tantra Yuktis, Adhikarana, Prayojana, Naikanta. So you have the views of several scholars being quoted, and therefore that is Naikanta. Hetu is the giving of reason. Some reasons have been given there why particular definition of Paka is not correct. So these are these various Tantra Yuktis can be gleaned from the previous discussion. These have been used there. These are lurking there, and the reader has to find out where there is Adhikarana, where there is Prayojana, etc. So can we go to the next slide, please? So now, in the previous discussion, we discussed. In the previous discussion, we dealt with about Shastric writing. Now let us come to creative writing. So in creative writing also, there is a discussion of what are gunas and what are doshas. And these have been discussed since the time of Bharata in the 2nd century BC, starting from his Natya Shastra. And in Natya Shastra itself, Bharata speaks of gunas as well as doshas in the context of what is called as Vachika Vinaya. There are 4 different modes of communication on the stage. The Aharya Vinaya, the Satvika Vinaya, the Vachika Vinaya, and the Angika Vinaya. So Vachika Vinaya is communication that makes use of the verbal mode, makes use of words, dialogues. So here Bharata speaks about what are gunas and what are doshas in this context. And sometimes the gunas are discussed in terms of doshas. So the merits are discussed in terms of faults. So the gunas are sometimes regarded as the negation of doshas. Some others regard them as the absence of doshas. So you can make out that there is a difference between negation and the absence. Negation is the complete opposite. Absence is that particular guna not being present. That is dosha. But some aestheticians discuss gunas and doshas separately also. Dandi is one of the main Alankarikas, poeticians, who has discussed this gunas in detail. And he discusses these gunas with respect to 2 streams of poetry that were existing in his time. And these 2 streams are geographically linked to one to the province of Vidarbha and another to the province of Gauda. And therefore, these streams are called as the Vaidarbhi and the Gaudi streams. And there was apparent divergence of opinion about what these gunas are and how they manifest in poetry between these Vaidarbhi and Vaidarbhas and the Gaudas. So some gunas pertain to Shabda. So some gunas, some merits are to do with words, and some other merits are to do with meaning. And some aestheticians actually discuss every guna as pertaining to both word as well as meaning. And how many gunas are there? Usually the accepted number of gunas is 10. But the number can go up to 24, as in the case of Bhoja. Bhoja in his Saraswati Kantabharana gives 24 gunas. Can we come to the next slide? So these gunas characterize poetic writing, and the poetic writing has to abound in these various gunas. What are these? Shlesha, Prasada, Samata, Madhurya, Sukumarata, Arthavyakti, Udaratva, Oja, Kanti, and Samadhi. These are the 10 gunas which are quoted by Dandi, and examples are given by him for each of these. So let us discuss these in detail, each of these gunas. So the first is Shlesha. So Shlesha is often used in the sense of punning, where you have 2 meanings for a single word. But here it is not used in that sense of a particular figure of speech. Here Shlesha refers to a particular guna, particular characteristic of poetry, and has nothing to do with punning. So what is Shlesha? Shlesha is the absence of looseness, the coalescing of words, the compactness of words. And why does this looseness occur in poetry? Looseness occurs if you look at the words per se. The looseness of words could be because of the presence of alpa pranas, the excessive presence of alpa pranas. And when I say alpa prana, what does it mean? It refers to the use of the first, the third, or the fifth syllable of each varga, kavarga, tavarga, pavarga, etc. So if you use excessively the first syllable, the third syllable, and the fifth syllable of each varga in your verse, the verse becomes very loose. Or it could also be because of the excessive use of ya, ra, la, and va. So if you use all of these particular syllables, it brings about a sense of looseness and the lack of compactness in what you write. According to Vamana, Vamana is one poetician who discusses each of these gunas as pertaining to both artha, shabda, as well as artha, as pertaining to both word as well as meaning. And he says that it is that quality where several words are so closely knit that they give a sense of being one. Yasmin sati bahuni api padani ekavat bhasanti. And probably this could be because of the presence of compounds in excess in Sanskrit writing or in writings in ancient Indian writings. So there is a sense of close words being closely knit and the entire compound giving a sense of being one word. But then you could look at Shlesha also as an Artha Guna, as something pertaining to meaning. And what is it? It involves cleverly bringing together two incongruous ideas. And examples are given for this. An example from Amrushataka is given to illustrate this. I will not go into these examples. Maybe in the discussion, I can quote some of these examples. Prasada. Prasada is clarity of meaning arising from the use of only absolutely necessary words, not using less or not using more. And you use the absolutely necessary words. Prayojaka matra pada parigrahena artha vaimalyam. Vaimalya is clarity of meaning. Artha is meaning. Vaimalya is clarity. And this occurs because of prayojaka matra pada parigraha. Prayojaka is absolutely useful. Prayojaka matra, absolutely useful, absolutely necessary. Pada, that is word. Matra pada parigrahena, using words that are absolutely necessary to convey a particular meaning. Or it could also be described as meaning which is arrived without much strain from the perspective of the reader, or using words that are well known, or not using roundabout expressions, which is called as pratiti subhagatva. So coming to the next slide. Then you have something called as samata. Samata is evenness. And what does this refer to? Evenness could again be in terms of shabda and in terms of artha. It could refer to uniformity in structure, that is homogeneity of diction from the beginning till the end. So here it basically is referring to the shabda guna of samata with respect to the words. And it would be as simple as you don't begin a sentence with active voice and end it in a passive voice. So it is absent. Samata is absent when you begin a sentence in active voice and end in a passive voice. Or it is also defined as not deviating halfway from a style with which one has commenced writing. Upakranta marga aparityaga. Aparityaga is not deviating. Upakranta is one which one has commenced. Marga is style. So not deviating from the style with which one has commenced writing. And again, it has an artha guna, artha counterpart. Samata can also refer to the meaning, not just to the diction. And what is it? It refers to evenness of an idea. And an example is quoted there. And this example shows an absence of samata in this verse. So chutasu manasa kunda pushpodgamesh valasa druma malaya maruta sarpantyete, etc. So what is being described by the poet here is the end of Shishira and the beginning of Vasanta. So the winter season has ended and the spring has not yet begun. And this particular period is called as Rutu Sandhi, between two Rutus, the intervening period between two Rutus, where the characteristic features of the succeeding Rutu have not yet appeared. And the poet actually has the intention to describe this particular Rutu Sandhi. He's not describing either Shishira or he's not describing Vasanta. He's describing the intervening period. And he says, Chutasumanasa kundaha. The kunda creeper, the flowers have fallen down. Pushpodgamesh valasadruma. But the other trees have still not, they are very lazy in putting forth their flowers. So the trees have not put forth flowers. The kunda creeper, the flowers of kunda creeper have fallen down. And describing like this, he finally says, Malaya Maruta Sarpantyete. These winds from the Malaya mountain, these southern winds are blowing. So now this is wrong here because there is no evenness of idea. Why there is no evenness? Because the southern winds blow with the onset of spring. They don't blow before the onset of spring. At least in the poetic convention, they don't blow before spring starts. They blow during the spring and not in the intervening period. So because the poet has described Malaya Marutaha Sarpanti Ete, these southern winds are blowing, this goes against the idea that is expressed in the rest of the verse, and therefore it brings about some fault in the evenness. So coming to the next guna, this is madhurya. Madhurya is exclusion of not using long compounds, and it is also a particular guna where words are heard clearly. Prithak padatva. So this refers to the shabda guna of madhurya. but it also has an Artha Guna. So Shabda Guna also has something else. It has Shrutyanuprasa as an important feature. What is Shrutyanuprasa? It is alliteration. Alliteration means the repetition of the same syllable again and again. Like Swachandochala, Chakachakura, Chate, where you have this cha coming repeatedly. So this is called as alliteration. And this alliteration in Madhurya Guna is based on Shrutyanuprasa. It is called Shrutyanuprasa. And this alliteration occurs because of letters that originate from the same place of utterance. So letters are divided into Kanthya, Talavya, Oshtya, etc. You might remember, if you had studied it in your school days, that the Devanagari letters are divided based on the place of utterance. Those that originate from the throat, those originating from the palate, those originating from the lips, etc. So when you have alliteration where the words that are used originate from the same place of utterance, that is called as Shrutyanuprasa. And Madhurya is characterized by Shrutyanuprasa. So all this is with respect to Shabda Guna of Madhurya, but it also has an Artha Guna counterpart. So what is the Artha Guna counterpart? It involves conveying even a simple idea in a charming way, or it can also be described as the absence of Gramyata, that is absence of vulgarity of ideas. So to give an example, instead of saying, from where have you come? So this is a very simple idea, a simple way of saying, where, from which province have you come? But then poets don't say so simply. They say, which is that province where people are sad because of separation from you. They don't say directly from where you have come. Indirectly, they say, which is that province whose people are feeling very lonely because you are separated from them. So this is conveying a simple idea in a very charming way. So coming to the next slide. So this is the Shabda Guna of Sukumarata. And what is Sukumarata? It is the avoidance of harsh consonants and conjunct consonants. Conjunct consonants are Sanyuktakshara, two consonants together, like Sh, etc. And harsh consonants are the consonants that first and the third consonant of each varga are harsh consonants. So avoiding these is called as Sukumarata, but these cannot be absolutely avoided, because if your writing abounds in soft consonants, that soft consonant will make your writing very loose. So you need a proper blend of harsh consonants as well as soft consonants. So that your bandha, the composition, doesn't become feeble and loose. So when you say Sukumarata, it doesn't mean completely avoiding the harsh consonants. It means a proper use of a combination of harsh consonants and soft consonants, but the soft consonants, in a way, there is a predominant use of soft consonants. Anishthura akshara prayam. Prayam means predominant use of aksharas, syllables, which are anishthura. Nishthura is harsh, anishthura is soft. So that is called as Sukumarata. So there is a predominant use of soft consonants, but there are also a lot of the harsh consonants are also used depending on the judgment of the poet. But it also again has an Artha component. So what is the Artha component of Sukumarata? Avoiding statements that convey inauspicious ideas, or even if you have to convey inauspicious ideas, conveying them in an agreeable way. So instead of saying that a particular person died, Mritavan, so Maranam Praptavan, so he attained death. Instead of saying that, you say Yashasheshaha Bhavat. So he has been left only with his fame, which means now what is remaining of him is only his fame. And from that, it has to be understood that he is dead. But you don't say directly use the word die. You say what is left of him now is only his fame. So then you have Artha Vyakti. Artha Vyakti again has these Shabda Guna and Artha Guna counterpart. So as the Shabda Guna, it is mostly included under Prasada itself by later authors. But as an Artha Guna, it is characterized by an absence of what later poeticians called as Neyata. It is a type of dosha, Kavya dosha, which is called as Neyata. What is Neyata? Neyata is where the sense of a verse is complete in itself and you don't require extraneous addition. And this is often absent in many poets, both earlier poets and poets, contemporary poets also, there is a lot of niyata that is required. The verse is not complete in itself. And when the poet actually recites his verse in front of the audience, because the verse itself is not complete, the poet himself gives a commentary on his verse and says that this happened, that happened, and you have to understand this verse in this particular context. There is an absence of arthavyakti in this particular, in these particular situations, where you have to add several extraneous matter to make the verse complete in itself. And Dandi gives this particular example. Mahi Mahavarahena Lohitad Udrita Udadehe. So the Mahavaraha, that is the primeval boar, that is the boar incarnation of Vishnu, he lifted the earth from the ocean, which was red. Now, all of us know, or at least the poetic convention is that the ocean is blue. The ocean is never red. And the poet is describing that the primeval boar lifted the earth from the red ocean. And now, how do you account for this redness of the ocean? The redness has to be accounted externally. The poet has to say, when Varaha lifted the earth, under his hoofs, the snakes of the Patala were crushed. And because these snakes were crushed, they oozed blood. And because of this blood, the entire ocean was turned red. And that is how the ocean became red. But all this is external information that is given by the poet who is reading out in front of the audience. These external information is not present in the verse itself. And therefore, this is an example of neyata. And when neyata is present, there is an absence of arthavyakti. And again, you have as an artha guna, it can also be considered as, some poeticians consider this as not as an absence of neyata, but as a faithful description of the nature of things. Swarupasya sakshat kathanam, as if a pen picture of a particular object which you are describing is present in front of you. Later poets also call this as swabhavokti, where there is a faithful description of particular object which the poet chooses to describe. Say particular animal or particular bird, etc. And its nature is described as if it is in front of us. Details are vividly described. So that is what Dandi considers. Some poeticians, not Dandi, some poeticians consider it as arthavyakti. Then you have udarata. What is udarata? Udarata again has a shabda component and has an artha component. So as a shabda guna refers to some liveliness of words, because of which they seem to dance. So to give an example, Kalindagiri Nandini Tatavana Trumalambini Madiyamati Chumpini Bhavatu Kapi Kadambini. So this gives a certain liveliness of the words. And because of this liveliness, there is the letters seem to dance. And Nrityamanata. So that is called as udarata with respect to the shabda. But with respect to arthaguna, what is udarata? It is the use of qualifiers that say something special about the object of description and which distinguishes it from the pedestrian. So instead of saying Kamala, instead of just saying the lotus, you add Leela to it and say Leela Kamala. Leela Kamala is a sportive lotus. And by using the word sportive lotus, you actually are trying to distinguish this particular lotus from pedestrian lotuses by adding this particular prefix Leela. So coming to the next slide. The next guna is ojas. And again, it has shabda and artha components. As shabda guna, it overlaps with shlesha. So it is described as bandhagadatva, the compactness of composition, which we discussed in under shlesha itself. Or it could be described as a profusion of conjoined consonants. Conjoined consonants are samyukta akshara, ksha, etc. But then as an artha guna, it has it has been described in 5 different ways. It could be the expressing an idea contained in a single word using a string of words. This is padarthe vakyartha rachanam. So you use a string of words to express an idea which is contained in a single word. or you could express the idea contained in a string of words using a single word. That is the opposite of that. Vakyarthe padabheda. So instead of saying she is a heavenly damsel, you say she doesn't wink. So nasa nimishati. So nimishati is to wink. Heavenly damsels or heavenly beings don't wink from an Indian tradition, from the point of view of Indian tradition. So that is one of the characteristic of heavenly beings. So instead of saying she is a heavenly damsel, you say sa na nimishati, she doesn't wink, and that itself gives you an idea that she is a heavenly damsel. Expanding an idea, which we also saw under Tantra Yuktis, expanding an idea, or brevity, which is expressing several ideas by knitting them together in a single sentence. That is called as samasa. Or careful use of qualifiers, you use adjectives and you use them very carefully. And they are not used just like that because these adjectives are very significant in some. So arthasya sabhiprayatvam. So these are 5 different ways in which the artha guna of ojas manifests. Then you have kanti. Kanti has as a shabda guna, it is the use of words that are not stale but give a certain polish to the composition. So instead of saying smita yuktadhara, smita yuktadhara means her lips are smiling, her lips smiling. Instead of that, you say smita stabakitadhara. So that means smiles are clustering like flowers around her lips. Instead of just saying her lips smiling. Or it could be an arthaguna. The arthaguna of kanti is what? It is the vivid portrayal of stimulants and behavioral responses so that emotions are communicated effectively. So it is the belief, or it is the argument of Sanskrit poeticians that mental states cannot be communicated directly. They can only be communicated through the stimulants and behavioral responses, the vibhavas and the anubhavas, through what caused them and the behavioral responses that stem from those mental states. It is these stimulants and the behavioral responses that the poet actually describes. It is not the mental state that he quotes. Nobody, for example, in a horror movie, it is not that repeatedly the message of fear is projected on the screen in front of you. Nobody says fear, fear, fear. But stimulants and behavioral responses are so created by the director, by the producer, etc., that the emotions, the emotion of horror is easily communicated, effectively communicated to the audience. So such effective communication of emotions through the vivid portrayal of stimulants and behavioral responses is called as kanti. That is the arthaguna of kanti. So coming to the next slide. So the last guna is samadhi, the last of the 10 gunas. As we already saw, Bhoja gives the list of 24 gunas. And I will not discuss all the extra gunas that Bhoja has described. Just give one example, which is sammitatva. So what is samadhi? Samadhi is a gradual build-up of tension. You either build up tension or you loosen the tension in the development of an idea. So that is called as aroha avaroha krama. Bhoja, he gives a list of 24 gunas and one example, sammitatva. And it has again, and Bhoja again divides all these 24 gunas into a Shabda counterpart and an Artha counterpart. The Shabda counterpart of Sammitatva is using only as many words as are needed to fully communicate an idea. Yavad Artha Padatvam. As many words. So you have idea and there are few words, only few words that can actually communicate that idea, and you use only as many words as are necessary for communicating that idea. And as an Artha Guna, it is the exact matching of word and sense. Shabdartau yatra tulyaustah. So coming to the next slide. So not only do these poeticians deal with the gunas, but actually they deal much more elaborately with the doshas, and entire chapters are actually devoted to the delineation of doshas. Examples are given and they are defined, and these examples are critically evaluated, etc. I didn't include these doshas because that would have made my presentation quite long. So I'll just tell shortly on it. So, for example, Kavya Prakasha has an entire dosha prakarana, an entire chapter on the doshas. And these doshas are divided by later poeticians into those that are anitya and those that are nitya. So anitya doshas are doshas which no longer become actually defects. They actually become gunas. The doshas themselves become gunas when in consonance with a particular sentiment that is being communicated. So there is a particular dosha called as Shruti Katutva, which is the use of jarring syllables. However, this is not a nitya dosha. It is not always a dosha. Sometimes it becomes a guna also. When does this use of jarring syllables become a guna? It becomes a guna when the emotion that is being conveyed is anger. So when the emotion is communicated as anger, you can easily visualize how the use of soft consonants will actually bring down the heightened sentiment. It will reduce the effect of the sentiment of anger. So in depiction of anger, actually the presence of Shrutikatva is not a dosha, but it is actually a source of char. It actually becomes a guna. On the other hand, when you use Shrutikatutva to communicate love, there Shrutikatutva is actually a dosha. Because when you communicate love, you need to use softer consonants, not jarring consonants or samyukta aksharas, etc. Coming to the next slide. So we looked at the Shastras, then we looked at the Kavyas. Now let us look at the commentaries. So as we saw in the first slide itself, commentaries are works that are written to explicate the meaning of the Shastras as well as the Kavyas. And different types of commentaries are there, and these commentaries serve various purposes. I'll just give few examples. So you have what is Tika. The Tika is the explanation of difficult words. Sometimes these words, these technical terms, Tika, Tippani, etc., might be used interchangeably also. So Tika is often used not just in the sense of explanation of difficult words, it is used in the general sense of commentary, Vyakhyana also. So Tippani is or Tippani or Tippana or Tippanika is a commentary on a commentary. So a commentary which is written on another commentary. For example, you have Bhaskara Kanta writing a Tippani on Abhinav Gupta's commentary on the Pratyabhijna Karikas of Utpala Deva. So that is a Tippani. Then you have Panjika. Panjika is a running commentary that analyzes every word in the original. You have a Bhashya which follows the sutra word by word. So the Bhashya is written for a sutra. Sutra is like a formulaic sentence. And for this formulaic sentence, you have which cannot be understood without the help of a Bhashya. And the Bhashya follows the sutra word by word. And not just does it follow the sutra, Bhashya also introduces several technical terms itself. And it also describes those very technical terms which it has introduced. Then you have Vartika. Vartikas are those that deliberate on ideas that are spelled out in the original text, that are not spelled out in the original text, or they are wrongly expressed in the original text. So what do these commentaries do? These commentaries not only identify the sections of a text. So as I said, the Tantra Yuktis are not conspicuously used by the authors of the Shastra. No author says that this is the Adhikarana, this is the Purva Paksha, or this is the Hetu, this is the Nirdesha, this is the Uddesha. They don't spell it like that. But it is the duty of the commentator to actually identify these various Tantra Yuktis that are there in the original text. So what the commentator does is, he or she not only identifies the sections of a text, but also their interrelationship. So the sections are interrelated in particular way. There's a logical sequence of the sections, and a particular section appears before another section for some reason. So for example, one section may be a prerequisite actually to understand another section. So, or one section may actually ward off obstacles in understanding sections that follow. There might be certain obstacles that are presenting in front of the reader, and these obstacles might have to be cleared for the reader actually to go to the next section. So in an intervening section actually clears these obstacles. So these various activities are performed by the commentators. So coming to the next slide. So commentaries are generally said to perform 6 functions: Padacheda, Padarthascha, Vigraho, Vakya Yojana, Akshepascha, Samadhanam, Vyakhyanam, Shadvidam Vidu. Mostly this is to do with poetic commentaries on poetical works, let's say Mahakavyas. So Padacheda is splitting of words. As you know, this is peculiar to Indian languages because or languages which have long compounds, and there you need to split the compound, or we need to know where word ends and where another word begins. So that is done by the commentator, Padacheda. Then you have Padartha, and once you have split the words, you need to know the meaning of each of these individual words, because words can have several meanings. You know, Sanskrit or Indian words used in Indian languages abound in several paryaya padas, synonyms, and you need to know in what particular sense a particular word has been used. So meaning of words. Then you have dissolution of compound. Compound, not only should you split the words in the compound, you need to also know how the words in the compound are related to one another. Is this a Bahuvihi compound? Is this a Dvandva compound, etc. So then you need parsing, which is Anvaya, that is the syntax. How do you make meaning of the entire sentence? Then there may be certain objections, maybe a grammatical objection, etc. And these objections have to be raised and they also have to be resolved. So these 6 activities are performed by commentaries, at least commentaries that are written for poetic works. One of the famous commentator in Indian tradition is Mallinatha. So Mallinatha has written commentaries on basically on the Panchamahakavyas, including Raghuvamsha and Kumarasambhava of Kalidasa and other works, Shishupalabhada, Kiratarjunya and Naishariya. So he makes this particular O before he writes. He says, Na amulam likhyate kinchin na anapekshitam uchyate. So he says that he makes this O saying that he will not write anything that is baseless, that is without a reference, and he will say nothing that is unessential. Which means obviously several commentators were doing this mistake. They were writing things without basis and were also explaining things which were not essential to understand a particular verse. And coming to the next slide, so you have these 2 verses on bad commentators whose methodology Mallinatha was not to follow. Chankara matre katichit pravrittaha पर्यायदानेन परे कृतार्थाः संवादवाचैव विभिन्नतेन्ये व्याख्याकृत किन्व्यता फलम्नः. What use of such commentators who chankaram, who want to just present their show off their knowledge? They create a lot of noise. Chankara matra is creating a lot of noise. Paryayadaneena pare kritarthaः. What other commentators do is to just give synonyms. And what is the use of just providing synonyms? Synonyms will not make the meaning of the original clear to us. Samvada vachaiva vivinvatenye. So there are also other commentators who use the exact words that are used in the original. And what is we are actually taking recourse to commentators because we are not able to make out what is there in the original. If you use the same words that are used in the original, what is the use of such a commentary? So, but there were still commentators who used the same words that were there in the original. So this particular poet says we have no use of such commentators. Then you have this another famous verse on how some commentators comment. Durbodham yadativa tadvijahati spashtartham ityuktibihi. Spashtarte shvati vistratim vidadati vyarthai samasadikaihi. Asthane nupayogibishcha bahubir jalpair brahmantanvate shotrunam iti vastu vipravakrata sarvepi teekakrata. All teekakaras, that is all commentators, create a lot of confusion in the readers. Why? Because Durbodham, there is something which is very difficult to understand in the original. What do these commentators do? They comment on such difficult to understand portions saying spashtam. This is spashtartham. Its meaning is very clear. Actually, it's very difficult to understand. Such places, bad commentators say, oh, the meaning is very clear here. And there are places where the meaning is very clear. Spashtarteshu ativistrutim vidadati vyarthai samasadikai. Where the meaning is very clear, they create a lot of confusion. They mix up things and what do? They use useless words. The meaning is already clear and it's very easy to understand. But where it is very easy to understand, they make things worse. Asthane anupayogibishcha bahubir jalpair brahmam tanvate. And they bring in unrelated conversations, unrelated references, etc., just to show off their knowledge. And such commentators actually create a lot of confusion in the readers. Coming to the next slide. So there is a particular section I wanted to discuss on plagiarism, and there is a detailed discussion of plagiarism, harana, artha harana and shabda harana in Rajashekhara's, again in Rajashekhara's Kavya Mimamsa. 3 entire chapters are devoted to plagiarism, 11, 12 and 13 chapters of Kavya Mimamsa. And I will not go into the details of in a detail, but there are really certain portions which need to be quoted and which are worth considering, and so only those particular portions will I quote and describe. He says, he starts by defining haranam. Harana is plagiarism as paraprayuktayoho shabdarthayoho upanibandho. So stealing words, shabda, artha, that is ideas, or because it is a compound shabdarthayoho, it can also mean both. So stealing words, ideas, or both, which have been used by paraprayuktayoho, which have been employed by somebody else. So tadvida, and he divides it into 2 different types, parityajyam and anugrahyam. So the parityajya is which must be avoided, and the anugrahya is that which is admissible. And to give an example of the stealing of shabda, there is a particular opinion there from the acharyas, again from the acharyas whom Rajashekhara repeatedly brings into discussions. So they say tatra ekapada haranam na doshaya. So they say it is not a mistake if just one word is borrowed from someone else. But Yayavariya is the word which Rajashekhara uses for himself. He says Yayavariya says, that is, I say, this is not correct. Anyatra dhyartha padat. So there is an exception to this. So this is an example of the tantra yukti of exception, that is apavarga, which we had earlier seen. So what is the exception? Except in the case of dvyartha pada. Dvyartha pada is where the word is used as a pun. So the person who has used the word has put in lot of mental work in using that particular word, because he has used that word in 2 different senses. So there is a lot of energy that is put from the point of view of the creator in using this particular word. So even though this word is one, this is a pun, and this one word, even if it is a single word, if you borrow it, it is an example for harana. It is an example for plagiarism. You cannot say that just because it's one word, it is not plagiarism. So then in somewhere else he cautions poets and maybe also the Shastrakaras, saying param apraptir yashaso na punar duryasha. It is better not to attain fame than attain infamy by getting caught for plagiarism. And he differentiates between plagiarism of words and plagiarism of ideas. He says the former is better, the latter is not admissible. He says uktayo hi arthantara sankranta na pratyabhignayante swadanteja tadarthastu haranadapi haranam svi. At least words that are copied take on new meanings. Words take on new meanings and are therefore not remembered as borrowed from elsewhere. And in fact, borrowing of words might be responsible for some new charm also. But ideas, if they are copied, are a clear case of stealing, clear case of plagiarism. Coming to the next slide. There is a funny verse in one of these chapters. He ends this chapter with this verse. Nastyachora kavijano nastyachoro vadijana sa nandati vina vachyam yojanati nikuhit. There is neither a poet nor a businessman who is not a thief, but only that poet and that businessman stay clear of disrepute, who know how to cleverly hide what has been stolen. So yo janati niguhitam. Niguhitam is to hide, cleverly hide what he or she has stolen. Only those people stay clear of disrepute, because it is impossible not to borrow anything from people who have come before us. There is neither a poet nor a businessman who doesn't steal from others. And then he divides poets into 4 different groups. He says there are certain poets who are utpadakas, some who are parivartakas, some who are achadakas, and some who are samvartakas. संवर्गकाः. So उत्पादकः कवि कश्चित् कश्चित् च परिवर्तकः आच्छादकस्तथा चान्यस्तथा संवर्गकोपरः. A certain poet creates what is new, but another poet, what does he do? He borrows the idea but modifies it. A third poet knows how to disguise what he has borrowed. And finally, there is a poet who neither knows how to create, nor knows how to modify, nor knows how to hide. Such a poet just collects verses of others. Then Rajashekhara divides poets into 24 different types, all of which I will not be discussing. And for each of these, he gives examples also. 24 types based on how they borrow words and ideas. And he warns against becoming someone who is who just mirrors what others have written. And he gives two terms here: Alekhya Prakhya and Pratibimba Kalpa. So Pratibimba Kalpa is mirroring, reflecting like a mirror, and Alekhya Prakhya is imitating like a painting. So he says that it is better to imitate like a painting rather than reflect like a mirror. And here is an example for a Pratibimba Kalpa type of verse. There is and he gives two verses, an original verse and a plagiarized verse. The original verse is of which I will give the meaning later, translation in the subsequent slide. Drishtvannyebham chedam utpadya rajva yanturvacham manyamanastranaya kachandadhe nagaraja karinya premna tulyam bandhanam nasti chanto. That is the original verse. The plagiarized verse is Nirviveka manasopi jantoho. Here there is also a change of the meter. There is a change of the meter, but that doesn't stop just because the poet who has plagiarized has changed the meter, doesn't stop us from calling this as a plagiarized version, because the meaning remains essentially the same. Nirviveka manasopi janto prema bandhanam ashrinkhaladama yat pratigajam gajarajah prastita shiramadari karinyaha. So what is the original verse? The original verse, can you go to the next slide? So the original verse, both these verses are speaking about an elephant. A tusker saw its rival and it broke free of its restraint, the chain with which it was tied up, and rushed forward, disregarding the words of the Mahout. But even such a tusker who broke free of its restraint was pacified by his beloved she elephant. And the poet ends by making a general comment. He says, there is nothing else that binds one as tightly as love. So the tusker who broke free of the restraint would be pacified by the beloved she elephant. And this shows that there is nothing which is a stronger bond than the bond of love. And what is the plagiarized verse? You can see it is almost mirroring what is there in the original verse. The fetter of love can bind even a beast. A tusker rushing towards his rival was restrained by its beloved she elephant. The only difference is, in the first verse, you begin with the particular and end with the general. So you give a particular example of a particular elephant, and then you end with a general statement saying that there is nothing else that binds as tightly as love. In the plagiarized verse, you begin with the general. The poet begins by saying the fetter of love can bind even a beast, which is a general statement, and he uses the same example, but he uses after the general. He uses the particular after the general. That is the only difference. But then for all other purposes, this is just a mirroring of the original verse. So let us also look into a scholarly debate in the 12th chapter. This is again a interesting debate on again on the topic of plagiarism. So Purana Kavikshunne Vartmani Durapam Asprishtam Vastu Tatascha Tadeva Durapam Asprishtam Vastu Tatascha Tadeva Samskartum Prayateta iti Acharya. Again, he is quoting the Acharyas. Na iti Vakpati Raja. He is again quoting someone called as Vakpati Raja as a counter argument to the Acharyas. Vakpati Raja says no. Asamsaram udare kavi pratidinam agrihita saro, pratidina grihita saropi, etc. So let us not look into the Sanskrit version. Let us come to the English translation. The next slide. So this is about borrowing from others. There is nothing that the past masters have not written about. So we can attempt only to polish their ideas. This is the opinion of the masters. But Vakpati Raja says no. No says Vakpati Raja. Why? Though poets have been writing since the beginning of creation, the seed of poetry has not yet been broken. So there is always scope for writing something new. So we must study. Why should we study the past masters? Because we must study the writings of others, that is the bygone poets, only to get a feeling of what poetry is. But then there is an argument to this. Some say, if we immerse ourselves in the writings of past poets, we expose ourselves to the danger of walking on the same trodden path. We will not come up with fresh ideas, say some. But there are others who say no. But we can still manage to partly modify their ideas. So modifying their ideas itself is a great contribution that we can do. And others have a different opinion. They say the minds of great poets think alike. So why should we study them? We should study them so we know what we must forsake or what we must avoid. We should know what we shouldn't repeat. And we will know what we shouldn't repeat only if we study our past masters. Then we know, okay, these are the ideas with which they have worked. So let us not think about those ideas. Let us think of fresh ideas. So we need to study past masters for this particular purpose, say a few others. But then Rajshekhara says no to all of these. He says, no, it is not that we always need to study the past masters, because he says something about the divine eye of creative genius, Pratibha Chakshu, the eye of creative genius. And he says he has a lot of confidence on this divine eye of creative genius. And he tells, the divine idea of creative genius will automatically know, because of deep contemplation, which ideas have already been visualized and which not. It is impossible to study all the works of all bygone poets of all continents, of all languages. It's not possible for a single poet to do so. And so we cannot go on that path. We cannot attempt to study all the previous works. And Rajshekhara says it is not even necessary to do that, because the divine eye of creative genius itself will automatically show us which ideas have already been visualized and which not. So coming to the next, coming to the conclusion, I conclude with this particular remark. So the next slide, please. Writing, as we have seen, be it scientific writing, the Shastra, or creative writing, Kavya, was a serious endeavor in the Indian tradition. And every word was weighed carefully before being put into writing. And this is not surprising. Why? Because writing was not as ubiquitous as it is now, or it was not even as easy. Easy, when I say easy, it's not even with respect to securing all the material that are necessary for writing, as easy as it is in modern times. So whatever was written had to obey certain standards. It had to obey the standards of Tantra Yuktis, if it had been the Tantras, that is the Shastra works, or it had to obey the gunas and doshas. It had to forsake the doshas and it had to be replete with gunas if it had been if it were a poetic writing. And especially in poetic circles, plagiarism was not endured, as we have seen in the case of how Rajshekhara actually chastises the those who plagiarize, and he tells it is better to die with better to die without gaining any fame rather than to die with infamy. And therefore, according to him, the fallout of plagiarism was a life of eternal disrepute. So with these few concluding remarks, I finish my talk, and thanks a lot for Meera, Niharika, Abhishek, others, and also our other members of our team, especially to Sangeeta ma'am for giving me this opportunity to share whatever little I know about this topic of Shastra writing and Kavya writing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir's modesty has always been very surprising. And we thoroughly enjoyed your class. Thank you for sharing new perspectives, which most of us are unfortunately unaware of. So we will take questions now. Participants, if you have questions, you know the drill, please raise your hands. Or alternatively, you can also put them in the chat box. So, and we would love to see your videos as well, so that we know who's asking the question and we can hear it from you as well. So if there are any questions, please raise your hands and you can ask them. So I can see a couple of questions here. So I will ask these people to unmute themselves and ask it. Just a second. So Sunil K seems to have a question. Sunil, sir, would you like to ask your question? Requesting to unmute you.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, my question was thanks for the insightful session, but and I have great respect for the Sanskrit language as I've been studying it for the past year. But my only contention or question was how can it be more applicable in our current context? Since 80% of Sanskrit literature or whatever the figures vary were in the form of kavya or poetics, and much of modern discourse, which is majorly in the English language, is structured in the form of prose. I get that you can get certain generic ideas, but how can it be made more applicable? That's the gist of my question.
Thanks a lot for the question. Yes, to an extent, what you say is correct, and I would take this as a Purva Paksha. But then, poetic writing, I'm to some extent convinced that all of these poetic gunas may not be applicable to contemporary poetry, even contemporary poetry that is written in Sanskrit. Even I find that even Sanskrit poets who write their poems don't have their poems are not replete with these gunas. But then those who wish to write in the traditional idiom, I personally write in the traditional idiom, and I feel these gunas are something which have to be kept in mind. It is not that. Am I visible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Yeah. It is not that the poet has to consciously remember these gunas. It is not that the poet remembers, okay, now I have to have Shesha here, I have to have Madhurya here, I have to have Sukumarata here, etc. But then when the poet is in the mode of composing poetry, when he is immersed in the object of his description, these gunas somehow come to him or her automatically. His particular, if he is writing in Sanskrit or say in any traditional language, which borrows a lot from Sanskrit, whose syntax and semantics are borrowed from Sanskrit. In such languages, if you are writing in a traditional mode, and if you are a poet of good caliber, these things come to you automatically. You don't need to actually think consciously about endowing your creation with all these various gunas separately. It comes as a package when you are immersed in your object of description. That is with respect to poetry. But with respect to Shastras, the Shastras are written in a combination of verse and in a combination of prose. So, but the verses in Shastras are by no means called as poetry. For example, you wouldn't consider Charaka as a poet. You wouldn't consider Sushruta as a poet. Though you have a lot of verses in Charaka and Sushruta, the verses are just a formal aspect of the writing. They can, for all purposes, be considered as prose writings itself. And whatever has to be conveyed in prose has been conveyed just in the form of verses, because it is useful if you convey it in the form of verses to remember. So it's basically a tactics and mnemonic tactics in order to remember what has been. Prose is very difficult to remember, but the Sanskrit prosody, the metrical nature of Sanskrit poetry makes it easier to remember even things which are very prosaic. Instead of having a list of, say, a list of aushadas, a list of drugs in prose form, if you list it in the form of verses, then for the person who is going through the text, it's easier to memorize these. And for Vaidya especially, it is very important to have these various aushadas at the tip of the names of these various aushadas at the tip of his or her hand. And therefore, the versified way of actually have listing out these various drugs comes in handy to remember. And so you cannot always say that it is completely poetry. What is written in the form of verse can actually be easily written in the form of prose also. And we are not in any way forsaking poetry, because there is no poetry to begin with in works like Charaka and Sushruta. And then the various tantra yuktis that have been discussed by Charaka, as I already pointed out, Avhad and others have actually, from an Ayurvedic background, have actually tried to link these with various terms used in research methodology. Even if you don't link these with terms used in research methodology, these can in fact be looked at certain tools to understand a text. And to a great extent, I think this these various tantra yuktis are lurking even in a scientific writing of the even in a contemporary scientific work. It is just that we don't think them from an Indian perspective. If we actually look at them from the Indian perspective, we can actually cull out all these various instances where the tantra yuktis have been used. Quoting something which has already been quoting something which has been described, reiterating something which has been already mentioned somewhere else, or quoting something which will come, alluding to something which will come later in the text, etc. All these things are don't we actually use in our thesis writing? We keep on using this. It is only that nobody has looked at thesis writing from a point of view of, and several times we use a lot of examples, lot of what is called as drishtantas, etc. It is not that we don't use it. It is only that these modern texts have not been analyzed from a point of view of tantra yuktis. And if there is a exercise that has to be given as a part of this class, I would actually be happy if somebody can do this exercise of looking at a modern thesis work of your choice and seeing where these tantra yuktis have actually been employed. That might be a good beginning to see how the tantra yuktis have actually these are way of communicating ideas, and I don't think there'll be innumerable ways of conveying ideas which don't match from one particular millennium and another particular millennium. Ideas are mostly conveyed in similar methods, though they might not be classified in similar ways. If you look at a particular thesis and try to find out where these tantra yuktis have been used, I think we can actually find instances where these tantra yuktis have been used. So if this can be actually taken up as a task following this particular session, I would be happy also.
Thank you, sir. So now we'll take a question from Kanchan. Kanchan, please go on.
Thank you for this wonderful session. My question is kind of an extension of earlier question. Here, I'm not just saying how can we do it, but I think I come from literary criticism background, and there also I can see that there are a lot many. For example, the question of meaning, which is central to literature, but it's not just tantra yukti. I mean, there is a whole of Mimamsa, or which we can see. I was just seeing while went through this Panchadashi, where we can see that Tatparya Nirnaya and all there are these 5 characteristics. They are just talking about meaning making process. So do you think that in humanities in general, maybe earlier now, there is a distinction between Shastra and Kavya. But I think earlier everything, I mean, there was no watertight compartment, because maybe moksha was the ultimate goal earlier. So they did not distinguish. I mean, there was this distinction as profane and mundane. So do you think that considering this part of Mimamsa and everything, that meaning making process, there is a way of forming a systematic framework for, I think, social sciences at least? I mean, I see a lot of potential, but I don't know how to go about it.
I actually don't come from a social science background. So, but then, as you said, the Kavyas and the Shastras, they're not 2 different disciplines in a way. And the Kavya, the poetry, was something different than Shastra. But then the poetic Shastra, there is a Shastra of poetry also, which is the Kavya Shastra or the Alankara Shastra. And Alankara Shastra, the Shastra of poetry, follows pretty much the same tantra yuktis that the Shastras of other disciplines follow. So the Ayurveda Shastra follows the same tantra yuktis that, see, Rajashekhara has not actually said that here I'm using Adhikarana, here I'm using Ekanta, here I'm using something else. But then we just saw that how all these Tantra yuktis which have been actually proposed with respect to Ayurveda are easily applicable even in the case of Kavya Shastra, even in the case of Kavya Mimamsa. We looked at two different passages from Kavya Mimamsa. One passage on the definition of Paka and another passage on plagiarism, and we saw how the writing was similar to a Shastric writing. So all the Tantra yuktis that would be used in Ayurveda would also be used in Kavya Shastra also. And that is why this particular quote by Charaka, where he says that if you understand one Shastra using the Tantra yuktis, you can easily understand all other Shastras also. So the Tantra yuktis would be very, as I said, the Tantra yuktis are not given on a platter. It is not that anybody who writes the particular text goes about saying that this is Adhikarana, this is Purvapaksha, this is Ekanta, this is Naikanta, etc. It is for the reader actually to discern that all these various aspects are present within the particular text. And yes, I think this could be a general framework for even, I don't know, means I have, as I said, I'm not from a social science background, but then I think somewhere one has to make a beginning. Why don't we actually try this to apply to the social sciences, to a text of social sciences, not as a research methodology, but at least to, as you said, for a meaning making process of particular text. Thank you.
We'll take a question from Sharmishta now. Sharmishta, are you here? We are trying to unmute you. Sharmishta?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. My question is very precise, actually. I mean, you were making distinctions between several commentarial writings, and you listed down Tika, Tippani, Panjika, Bhashya, Vartik. So my question to you is, how would you differentiate between Bhashya and Panjika? Because both are actually running commentary, and they focus on each and every word written in the original text and or monograph. So please kindly deliberate.
Yeah. So Bhashya is basically written for a sutra. So a sutra is something which is said in a very condensed form. You must have heard about the sutras, say Panini's sutras in Panini's Ashtadhyayi. So a Bhashya is basically written for a sutra, and Panjika is not specifically written for a sutra. Panjika could be written for say for any other Shastric writing also. It is not just for illustrating something which is in a very condensed form. It not be always for a sutra. It can also be for some, say for example, it could be to a karika. So you could have something which is written in the form of a verse. The original work is in the form of verse. It is not in the form of sutras. And the Panjika may take up each of these verses in the original each of these words in the original text, and then original verse actually, and then describe each of these words. So it is basically to do with the format in which the original text has been written. So when the original text is being written in the form of a sutra, then the commentary to that becomes a Bhashya. When it is not written in the form of sutra, that could be a Panjika.
Okay, so we have Vatsayana's Bhashya written for a Gautama's Nyaya Sutra, but as for Siddhanta Muktavali written by Vishwanath Nyaya Panchalan on Karikavali, should it be regarded as Bhashya also or Panjika? Siddhanta Muktavali.
Okay, can you please repeat the question?
Yes, yes. We have Vatsayana's Bhashya, which is written, which is a word by word interpretation and interpretation of introduction of technical terms also based upon Maharshi Gautama's Nyaya Sutra. But what about Siddhanta Muktavali, which is the auto commentary of Vishwanath Nyaya Panchalan's Bhasha Paricheda Karikavali? Do we regard Siddhanta Muktavali as a Bhashya or a Panjika?
Oh, okay. See, I'm not very conversant with the Nyaya works, but then I think these terms often are used interchangeably. But let me get back to it. Let me ponder on this particular question and get back to you.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Ashita has a question. Ashita, if you're here, do you
Yeah,
go on? Ask a question.
yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for the lecture. I wanted to know if there is a source which we can refer to where these Tantra Yuktis are explicitly written both for Shastra and Kavya, and the name of the paper which compares it with the research methodology that you had referenced to
Yeah.
in lecture.
Yeah. So the Tantra are basically described in detail in Sushruta Samhita as well as Charaka Samhita. There are a lot of English translations available of both Sushruta Samhita and Charaka Samhita. As I said, in Charaka Samhita, it is only the Tantric, the Charaka Samhita just mentions the Tantriktis by name. It does not describe them. And the commentary on Charaka Samhita by Chakrapani actually, and also there is another commentary, Jalpakalpataru, both of which give extensive information on each of these Tantriktis. Chakrapani's commentary might be translated in English. Jalpakalpataru, I am still doubtful. I actually looked into the original text, so for me it was not very difficult. But then if you look into any translation of Charaka Samhita or Sushruta Samhita, and these translations are available on archives.com. So there, in the last chapter, in both in Charaka as well as in Sushruta. In Sushruta, the Uttara Tantra of Sushruta Samhita gives the last chapter gives these Tantra Yuktis, and in Charaka Samhita also it is present in the last chapter. So a translation of any of these two texts, if you can get hold of from the archives.com, you might be able to get a comprehensive idea. And most of these translations will also have accompanying notes, so to make points clear. So if you look into them, probably you will be getting a comprehensive idea of the Tantriktis used in Ayurveda Shastra. But as regards, there is also a section on Tantriktis in Artha Shastra of Chanakya. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to go through it, and therefore I didn't take examples from it. But then you could look into that also. But with respect to Kavya Shastra, I am unsure if any of the Kavya Shastra texts have actually extensively dealt with Tantra Yuktis. I don't think they have dealt with Tantra Yuktis. But as I said, they do borrow from Tantra Yuktis. It's the same mode of argumentation. It is the same way of writing that is present in the Kavya Shastra, that is present in other Shastras also. And obviously, they also make use of all these Tantra Yuktis. But there is no one particular text which mentions the Tantra Yuktis as used in Kavya Shastra and gives you examples. Maybe you will have to first understand the Tantra Yuktis from Charaka Samhita and take the Charaka's words seriously. That if you understand Tantra Yuktis on one particular Shastra, that will help you understand another Shastra also. So these Tantra Yuktis, I don't think it was necessary to be repeated everywhere. It's enough if Charaka has repeated and take his words seriously, look for, understand these Tantra Yuktis from an Ayurvedic point of view and see where these have been employed in the Kavya Shastra.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think that brings us to the end of all questions for today's session. So if you have any more questions, we will be opening up the WhatsApp group and you can ask it there. Sir, Ashita is asking you for the name of the paper.
Yeah, I'll just get back to you on this. This is a 2016 paper by I think Anhed et al. Or somebody. I'll share the link with you.
Great, thank you, sir. So yeah, participants, we are coming to the end of the session for today, and we have shared the Google form for attendance with you. Also, the second assignment has been sent out via email to all of you. We will be sharing the assignment once more in the WhatsApp group in case any one of you missed it. So if there are any more questions, we can open the WhatsApp group and you can ask it there. So with that, I have to thank Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, who is a very insightful, very knowledgeable person and a wonderful teacher to all of us, who has come here today and given us a beautiful lecture and a very, very informative one at that. So thank you very much, sir, for giving us this delightful lecture. And also Dr. Sangeeta Menon, who is the head of the Department of the Consciousness Studies program at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. She is the one who is facilitating all these lecture series for us. So thank you, ma'am, as well. and also Niharika Sharma, who constantly supports us with enabling the Zoom platform, and Abhishek Srivastava and Ashwini ji, who is also at the back end supporting us. So thank you everybody once again, and we'll see you next Tuesday with another lecture. So thank you everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.